Behaviors become the focus, but those behaviors are really in response to the neuroinflammation that the child's experiencing.
Welcome to the Doctor's Pharmacy. I'm Dr. Mark Hyman. That's pharmacy with an F, F-A-R-M-A-C-Y, a place for conversations that matter. And today we're going to have a very difficult conversation about autism, which is a diagnosis that is increasing at dramatic rates, from 1 in 1,500 or more to, up to 1 in 35 boys. I mean, it's staggering. And the question is why? And today we're going to talk about autism with none other than our favorite doctor at the Ultra Wellness Center, George Papanicolaou. He's an extraordinary doc, one of my favorites, and he's just such a good man. And I've come to really respect him and honor him and learn more about him every day. And not only is he a great doctor, but he's a good human being, and I'm just happy to be able to work with him. So welcome, George.
Thank you, Mark.
Now, this is a tough topic. Autism has been increasing. It's a topic of great controversy. There are all sorts of debates about what causes it, vaccinations, not vaccinations. We're not going to get into that today, but it's a hot topic. And there's no arguing with the fact that it is increasing. Mm-hmm. It is really increasing. And some say, it's just better counting and better assessments, but not at the scale we're seeing it. So why are we seeing such a rapid increase in autism?
Well, that's the controversy. We're not entirely sure why we're seeing it. I mean, there are some thoughts about, one of the things I've read is the major way of thinking about it in science today is that it's 80% genetic and 20% environmental, which really, when I read that statistic, I was really shocked because, and so there's definitely a genetic component to it, but it's clear that the thing that changes, the thing that can improve, the thing that can even lead to a child coming off the spectrum diagnosis is changing those environmental inputs. So science may say it's only 20%, but it's 100% of what works, and that's what counts.
Just to stop you there, because if you look at the data, it's pretty striking. Yeah. In the 60s and 70s, the rates of autism were about 1 in 5,000 kids. 1 in 5,000 kids. Now, it's 1 in 54 kids. And boys at a much higher rate.
1 in 35 and girls 1 in 145.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And I can't keep up because every year it's getting worse. And boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed. So, I get going from 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 2,000 or 1 in 1,000, but not 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 35 boys. That doesn't make any sense as a genetic problem. No. Because our genes don't change that fast. But you know what's changed? Our environment. So what are the real drivers and causes of autism?
Number one on my list.
It's not a random event.
No, it's not random at all. And I think that, as you just brought out, there's just something more going on. I think it's pretty clear we're suffering the effects of very modern society. And one of the things we have in our society that is really dangerous is the food that we feed ourselves. So it really starts with food that in many ways is toxic, from the glyphosate that's in it and the GMO seeds that are used. Our food supply damages us. It's information, as you've said so many times. And not only does it have a direct impact on our gut microbiome, but it has information that actually changes and can impact our genes. And so from one generation to the next, you can actually turn genes on that will impact the next generation and the generation after that. So food has a direct impact on our gut microbiome, has an inflammatory autoimmune impact, and it has a genetic impact. So I would start with food, followed by toxins, heavy metals.
Yeah, absolutely. Heavy metals, pesticides, chemicals. Dr. Phil Landrigan, who's an incredible scientist, has really documented how the increase in toxic load in our society has really affected these kids. And they're like the yellow canary in the coal mine. The canary was put in the coal mine with the coal miners. So when the canary drops dead, the air was bad and you had to get out of there. Right. Well, these kids are genetically susceptible. And we always say the genes load the gun, the environment pulls the trigger.
Yes.
And what's changed dramatically is our food supply Not only have we added all these agrochemicals, pesticides, herbicides, glyphosate is a microbiome destroyer, and now it's on
Absolutely.
70% of all crops. And it not only destroys the microbiome of the soil, but it destroys our own human microbiome, which is critical for our health. And 95% of autistic kids have gut issues, have real gut issues. Not only
Major.
that, we've changed the kind of food we're eating. For example, the gluten that we're eating now is not the wheat that we ate, that our ancestors ate.
No.
It's a hybridized form of wheat that has much higher levels of gliadin proteins, much more likely to cause issues with kids. We are born by C-sections, we give antibiotics, we're not breastfed. All these things tend to get these kids' immune systems dysregulated. And one of the things we know about autism is that it's an immune disorder. If you do an autopsy on these kids' brains, they're just riddled with inflammation. Riddled with inflammation.
Yeah.
They actually done brain scans and they see these brains are bigger. Why? Because they're swollen. And why are they swollen? It's all the same things we think about in functional medicine that cause inflammation. It's food sensitivities, it's toxins, it's leaky gut, it's all these factors, allergens, microbes, infections, all these things are driving it. And we don't approach autism in that way in this country. We don't treat it as a systemic disorder. I always say that, is it a brain disorder or is it a disorder that affects the brain? Is it a systemic disorder that affects the brain? It is not a brain disorder. And the manifestations are in the brain, right? But the actual causes are things we can do something about.
Yes.
So when parents, I see this all the time, George. It just makes me so heartbroken when these parents get a child with autism, it gets diagnosed, and essentially what they're told is, your child has autism. There's really not much treatment. You can use what we call ABA, behavioral therapy, and get ready for a difficult life. Get ready to put your kid in an institution someday, and we're sorry. That just is unconscionable in my mind, given the amount of science we now have about autism, about the inflammation, about how to treat these things. And it's just devastating to these families, and yet they're not given any pathway to help these kids improve the quality of their health through their life.
Well, they're given a pathway, but it's a limited pathway.
Yeah, and
it's a pathway that you just mentioned. It's using applied behavioral analytic therapy, and that's just to change the behavior, right? Which is just a symptom of the neuroinflammation that the child is experiencing. A lot of their behaviors become the focus, but those behaviors are really in response to the neuroinflammation that the child's experiencing. And so one of the latest ways of trying to treat children with autism is actually diagnose them sooner, because data has shown that children with autism will do better socially if you treat them more intensively early on with these therapies: speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and then applied behavioral analytics. Therapeutic model by itself doesn't work. That's why I think
it helps them adjust a little bit. It's so crude.
Well, when I say it doesn't work, it doesn't give the mother that child that she knows that her child can be, a child that can interact, a child that can feel, a child that can fulfill all their neurologic capability. That those behavioral changes aren't enough. And that's why, as I've said to you before, I think every kid with autism should have a functional medicine workup, because we do look at the systemic impacts, the systemic causes of this brain disorder. And it's in doing so that we've been able to see as many changes as we do in the children that we treat with autism here at the Ultra Wellness Center.
It's really true. I hate to say this because it sounds terrible, but I love seeing kids with autism because there's so many things you can do.
Absolutely.
They almost all have immune dysregulation. They almost all have gut issues. Most of them have toxin loads that are high. Most of them have nutritional deficiencies. Many of them have mitochondrial issues, which are energy production. And these are all things that we know how to approach with a functional medicine approach.
And they're not that hard to figure out or find in testing.
No. And I'm not saying we can cure autism, although I've had cases of complete reversal, which is dramatic. But we can improve the quality of their life. We can improve their functioning. We can improve their speech. I remember I met this one doctor who was an incredible physician, and he told me this incredible story of his son who was autistic. And I'd written this book years ago called The Ultra Mind Solution, which was about how to fix your broken brain by fixing your body first, by healing your body first. Because it was very clear to me that most brain disorders were systemic issues where there was imbalances in the body that affected the brain. And one of the simple things when I talked about some of these cases of autism in the book, this doctor read the book and saw that I had recommended to get off of gluten and dairy, and we're going to talk about why that's important. And he said he just tried it with his son, who was 5 years old and hadn't said a word his entire life. And he got him off gluten and dairy, and a short while later, the kids started talking, just started chatting, and he was learning language. He had receptive language, but he had no expressive language. And he just literally started crying. And when I hear these stories, sometimes it's that simple. Now, it's not always that simple.
No, it's
not.
But
But we know a methodology, really a system of evaluating patients using the model of functional medicine, understanding the body as a system, and being able to map out where the imbalances and dysfunctions are and fix those and get these patients to get better.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to know that it's now been changed to the terminology autism spectrum disorder, because it's not autism, it's autisms. It's a spectrum. Every child is different. We have no protocol, but we know where to look. And every child's going to have is going to have a puzzle, a complex puzzle, pieces of puzzles that we're going to have to put together. It is different for every kid. One of the things that I do first when a family comes to me is I let them talk and I let them tell me their story. And I listen because they haven't been listened to for a long time. Most of the families that come to me have not been heard, and they've been given tools that don't work, and they come discouraged and disappointed. And I can see the apprehension on their face of whether or not they're going to be heard. And so one of the most important things I do is I make that connection with moms and dads and help them understand that they've come to a place that they're going to be heard and that they're going to be helped. Mm-hmm. And the things that seem to be two of the really hot buttons for parents are sleep and behavior and gut issues. Diarrhea, constipation, and then the behavior and the lack of sleep.
What I want to sort of underscore is that in traditional medicine, when you get a diagnosis of autism, it's a brain disease.
Yeah.
And you need to use psychological tools to fix it.
Yep.
You use psychiatric drugs to suppress the symptoms, which they give them antipsychotics and all kinds of stuff.
Anti-seizure meds, antidepressants, anxiolytics.
Yeah, it's terrible. And when these kids come in, if you take a good history,
it all becomes apparent.
You find so many other physical problems with these kids. Like you said, gut issues. 95% have gut issues. They have congestion around their nose. They've had earaches and ear infections and taken lots of antibiotics.
Eczema.
They've had eczema. They have dry spots all over their skin. Their hair and scalp. They might have dandruff. They have all these immune and gut issues. And it's so well described in the science. This is not stuff we're just hypothesizing. This is really there. They're documented. And then the question is, why are they ignored? Why do we ignore all these things which are clues? They're like breadcrumbs that tell you what's going on, right? Or if the kids,
it's shocking.
It's shocking to me.
It is shocking.
And like the other thing I want to just underscore what you said, which is so important, George, is that when you see someone with a disease like autism, they're all treated uniformly. Mm-hmm. Okay, you have these descriptive behaviors. You have no expressive language. You're socially disconnected. You have sort of repetitive behaviors. There's like, if you look at the DSM-5 criteria, which is a psychiatric manual, these are the criteria that you have to meet the definition of autism.
Right.
But there are 100 ways to get to those symptoms. And there are 100 different ways to treat these patients.
Yep.
And if you've seen one kid with autism, you've seen one kid with autism. It doesn't mean you can. Yes, there are common themes, and there are things that you will do. But in each kid, it's different. Some kid, it's a mitochondrial issue. Some kid, it's a heavy metal issue. Some kid, it's a gut issue. It's so different. Some kids have severe methylation issues and B vitamin issues. Some kids, have other issues that really are related to infections that are untreated. So
toxins.
Yeah, toxins. So there's really an investigational level. Yeah. I mean, we had a professor from was trained at Harvard and Oxford, a pediatric neurologist who came to Cleveland Clinic to do ground rounds, Suzanne Go, who's done some incredibly nuanced research published in JAMA and major medical journals on mitochondrial dysfunction in these kids. Their brain can't produce energy. And they give them mitochondrial support, which is basically supplements that we use to support the energy production.
And guess what happens?
They get better.
You start to see immediate improvements.
Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Hyman. Thanks for tuning into the Doctor's Pharmacy. I hope you're loving this podcast. It's one of my favorite things to do, and introducing you all the experts that I know and I love and that I've learned so much from. And I want to tell you about something else I'm doing, which is called Mark's Picks. It's my weekly newsletter, and in it, I share my favorite stuff, from foods to supplements to gadgets to tools to enhance your health. It's all the cool stuff that I use and that my team uses.